So today we're going to be talking to you about advancing nuclear energy through testimony. To the left side of the right-hand side of the podium. We get it? Okay, that makes sense.
I got it.
We've both spoken at several testimonies for commissions, regulatory agencies, and for the legislature. So we're not experts, but we do have a bit of experience doing it, and we're hoping to share some of that with you today.
My name is Alyssa Hayes, for those of you who may not know me. I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois in nuclear engineering, and while I was there, that's when I first started getting involved in advocacy, because Clinton and Quad Cities nuclear power plants were on the chopping block, and I was part of the movement to help save them through the passage of FEJA, and then I continued working with Generation Atomic for years after that, and I'm currently working my PhD at the University of Tennessee.
All right. I guess that means it's me. My name is Madison Schroder. I did my undergrad at the University of Missouri. I'm currently the policy coordinator for Generation Atomic, and I'm getting my PhD in political science at the University of Oregon. I study finance and international political economics. That's why we're allowed to be up here. So what is a testimony? So essentially it's a way to let decision makers know about your position on a bill or an issue. This is done either through government agencies such as the Department of Energy, regulatory agencies such as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Congress, or legislative bodies at the local, state, and federal level, and then commissions. An example of this is the Coastal Commission held or gathered public testimony on the continued operation of Diablo Canyon, and we showed up for that. So historically, the anti-nuclear community really shows up to give testimony at these different hearings, and they're very vocal. And so it's extremely important that the pro-nuclear community takes time out of their day and out of their lives to express pro-nuclear support to these agencies. So essentially there's two types. The first is written, and these have date and time deadlines. The next is verbal, and this is during the public hearing. So here's your testimony tree. So it begins with an issue or a bill. This could be a bill for allocation of funds or regulatory statutes, or an issue such as the relicensing of a continued plant or the continued operation of an existing plant. So this can be done either written or verbal. Written is submitted either through email or online submission, and verbal is submitted is done either in person or virtually. Since COVID, most verbal testimonies are given over Zoom, which makes them extremely accessible to everyone in this room. So who can give a testimony? Pretty much everyone. There is an exception to those of invited experts, but that's not really what we're talking about here today. We're talking about agencies that have invited the public to give testimony on a particular issue. It's going to be experts, employees, activists, members of the community, and concerned citizens. And that's all of you. So if there's a particular bill or issue coming up in your area, or even if it's not in your area, oftentimes there will be public testimony opportunities attached to that.
Like if you have a stake in whatever issue is being discussed at a hearing, you're a stakeholder. That automatically makes you a stakeholder. And if you are aware that it's happening and you have a reason to care about it, then I encourage you, everyone in this room to partake. How would you prepare for written and verbal testimony? How do you craft this, right? Sometimes it can be like, what am I supposed to say? I have this limited amount of time. What's worth putting in and what's not? So the first thing that you should do is really go back and think about your perspective before you even start writing, before you even start collecting the relevant facts. Consider it's really easy to get aggressive and say here's why everyone else should care about this issue, here's why I'm going to this hearing and why they should pass this bill. But that can come across sometimes as kind of pushy, and I know that it's kind of annoying to have to play politics, but it's more effective if before you even sit down to write your testimony, you consider, why do I care in the first place? Why do I care about thorium? Why did that push me to be pro-nuclear? Do I care about the jobs? Do I care about the technological advancement? Do I care about clean energy? Think about where your passion is coming from, and have that feeling in mind when you're writing. It's going to come across. People are going to be able to tell that you have the passion, and that makes a world of difference. At this stage, then you would start thinking, okay, now what is this hearing about? Make sure that you're writing everything within context. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting and listening to other people's testimonies before I go, and sometimes it's just like experts prattling off facts, but then they're like not really directly related to the issue at hand. So you don't want to do that either. So you want to make sure that you understand how your information is going to push and provide context to whatever it is that the hearing is specifically about. You want to make sure your data and statistics are relevant. You also want to consider who are you talking to? Is this a committee for clean energy and water? Is this a committee that's related to jobs and business in the state? Is this a regulatory body? You want to make sure that you're considering your audience and what it is that they really care about when crafting your testimony. If you really don't want a mismatch of like things that you talk about are not things that that group of people cares about. You also want to know in advance, how long do you have to present? It's not 5 minutes, it's not 35 minutes, it's almost always 1 minute or 2 minutes. And that's it, that's all you got. You have to make the most of it and you have to be effective in that 1 to 2 minutes. So a lot of people like just go up and wing it. Sometimes that can work, like if you're like really solid about just speaking from the heart in a very short period of time, but I would encourage everybody to write it out and practice. I personally write it out and practice it every single time to make sure that it fits in the time. And
they will cut you off.
They will cut you off.
They'll just cut your mic.
So now you've written your testimony. Maybe add a couple, we'll spice it up a little bit. You want to make sure that you provide time to thank whoever it is you're talking to before you start talking. You want to make sure that your disposition and like the way that you've worded things remains like kind, open-minded. If you're like super aggressive, it doesn't like reflect well on the pro-nuclear community. Only provide information that you know to be factual. Like sometimes it's really easy to just like say things generally, but without really having like the data to back it up. Or if like you don't know that for sure, just maybe pick a different route and make sure that you're speaking mostly to the people who you're there for, the committee members, the regulatory body. Don't just speak at like the anti-nuclears who said some weird crazy shit like 5 minutes ago and you really want to like talk at them or talk back to them. It's hard not to, but you can't. There are caveats about addressing misinformation that we'll get to in a sec. But again, I cannot stress this enough, to actually practice your testimony and make sure that it stays in time. What you don't want is for the committee chair to be like, hey, John, where'd John go? Where'd he go? I wanted to pick on him.
You knew you were going to pick on him, so you left.
All right. Oh, he's out there. All right, we'll pick on Eric. What you don't want is to be like, Eric, I'm going to have to cut you off. We're going over time. I'm muting your mic. And he's in the middle of saying something, and he didn't even get to his conclusion. It looks so bad. Okay, so now you've got it written, you've practiced it, you're ready to give your testimony, you're there waiting for your turn. What are like the steps of like, you know, when do you talk about what, like when do you do what? You want to generally make sure that you like actually say who you are first, and again, thank your host. So for instance, and the introduction should be like maybe like 10 seconds. You can go a little longer if you have 2 minutes. One time I heard someone give a testimony where they spent a full 1 minute listing off all of their like qualifications and their expertise, and they're like, I was like, this isn't, why are you reading your resume? Like, yes, that makes you really believable, but then you don't have any time to say anything. So you want to keep it short. So it might look like something like, thank you to the committee chair for allowing me to be here and providing this opportunity to speak. My name is Alyssa Hayes. I'm a woman of color from Lake County, because sometimes your video is off and they have no idea who you are. You generally want to say where you're from, and then your affiliation. So I'm a PhD candidate studying nuclear engineering. If you are like not from the state, and this is like a committee specific hearing or something that's like in a state, and you're not from that state, maybe just forget to say that. But if you do live in that state, say so. Tell them that you're a constituent, mention the county that you're from, mention like, even if you like live in the state, but you like vote in another state, you live there, it counts. So it's always important to make sure that it's known to whoever's hosting the hearing that their constituents believe in nuclear power. And so in terms of the content, there's kind of like 3 major things that you could do. If you have 2 minutes, you could squeeze in like facts and data and statistics that are relevant and a personal story or anecdote. If you only have 1 minute, it's probably better to just pick one, so that way you do one of those 2 things well, instead of trying to like rush a personal story, which is never going to look good, or like, you know, you provide some facts, but they're not really contextualized well. If you only have a minute, pick one. If you have 2 minutes, you can kind of do both. And you generally want to end on your ask. So you want to end on like the clear, direct, this is what I support, this is what I want you to do. I've also heard testimonies where people like say all these facts that are kind of disjointed, and then at the end they like don't say what they want, and you're like, are they pro or anti-nuclear? I can't tell. And you're like, who are they? So you generally want to end with like, if California is serious about decarbonizing their electric grid by 2045, then I encourage all of the committee members to do everything in their power to save Diablo Canyon. Clear, direct ask, something that is powerful and connects to what it is that they care about.
All right, so after you've given your verbal testimony, there's often opportunities to submit written testimony. It's very similar to verbal testimony, except for the fact that it's a lot more structured and formal. You know, it's actually a lot like writing a paper. You're going to have your intro, your conclusion, and a series of body paragraphs. But the most important thing that your verbal or your written testimony has to have is a very explicit ask and argument. These committee members are going to be reading, or it's probably their staffers, are going to be reading hundreds of written testimonies. And so you want to make sure that your ask and your argument is in the first few sentences. And it needs to be concise and to the point. Again, they're reading hundreds of these. These are often submitted via portal or email. It's bureaucracy. A lot of times it's hard to find where these are supposed to be submitted to. And then these are often published for public viewing. So while a written rant is very good for the soul, unless you want that on public record for a very long time, make sure its content and cadence are really taken into account. So the steps of this are very similar to that of a verbal testimony. You want to gather your information and data, and this isn't just information about the issue or the bill, but the information about when do you need to turn this in. You know, it's like school. When do you need to turn this in? How long can it be? Sometimes it's only a page. Who are you writing to? And yeah, and then all the specifics about the issue or the bill. And since you are given such a small space, or you want to be as concise as possible, create an outline. Make sure that you know everything that's going to go into it. Make a clear claim and ask, and then include personal connection to the bill and the issue, but make sure that your personal connection connects extremely clearly to your ask of this commission or this body. Reread and revise, have somebody read it to you, read it out loud, and then do not forget to actually submit it. Happens all the time. When you're writing these, you know, written or verbal testimonies, oftentimes you need to include each of these 3 appeals for persuasion. The first is an appeal that uses logic and reason. And people in the pro-nuclear community are very good at doing this, because oftentimes the logic really stands up to support nuclear energy. And we can beat that into the ground all day, every day. But what the nuclear community is not as good at doing is these next 2. Appeal that develops the character and credibility of the speaker, and appeal that engages and activates the audience imagination or emotion. So while we can, you know, talk about the logic and the facts of nuclear energy all day, which we've done for years, it's these other 2 that really get into the hearts and the minds of these bodies and the public that's also listening and reading these testimonies as well. So while, you know, spewing facts is really good, how are you actually connected to this bill or this issue personally is what's going to get the attention of these bodies and the public. So, for example, if this were me, I would say, you know, facts, 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 And then when I realized that nuclear power would bring millions of dollars into my community that would help the people that I love and the people that I care about, in terms of public safety, schools, infrastructure, I knew I had to do something to advocate for it. People belong in communities everywhere, and they understand that, by supporting nuclear energy, they're supporting the people that they actually care about. And it's not just some, corporate guy who wants to build a nuclear power plant and make a bunch of money, but it benefits you as well.
Okay, so here's that misinformation part that everybody, I'm sure, is looking forward to. How do you address the anti-nuclear people who maybe spoke before you, and should you? If you are approaching this testimony and you're rolling with a crew of other pro-nuclear people, sometimes you may want to say, okay, these people already have, this segment of our group already has some really strong testimony, or they have an extremely relevant personal story. Keep your testimony the way it is. No matter what the anti-nuclear say, don't address them. Give your arguments and your facts. You should be addressing the things that the committee cares about anyway. However, if there's a few people in your crew, or you're flying solo and you're like, I really feel the urge to address this one thing that this anti-nuclear person said. I saw the committee member, or one of the powerful committee members, or a chair or something, nodding their head along to something an anti-nuclear advocate said. That might be a time where you may want to address that, because clearly the committee member is being swayed by them. And that happens sometimes when you see oh no, are they making arguments that are being perceived as good? So it's a matter of is it worth addressing, right? Sometimes the anti-nuclear advocates literally sound so crazy, and you can tell the committee members don't care. Let them talk themselves into the ground. Let them ruin their own arguments. But if they come and they're poised and they speak within the 1 to 2 minutes and they look professional and the committee members look like they're agreeing with them, that might be the time to be someone should address the arguments that the other side is making. The way that you want to address it is, this one is a time where if you can fit passion for safety or your community, or the nuclear power plant in my community funds the public schools in there, that would be the direction to take in terms of emotional direction. What you don't want is to seem combative against the other side, because that just generally doesn't look good. So you also want to consider, what is it that the other side is saying? So there are some key cases where you might just want to, even if a committee member is nodding along with them, still not address it. The one big case might be if a person online says, I'm an Indigenous American, and there's a long history of the way that nuclear material has been mined in the United States, and that's something that's concerning to me, or I know folks from Church Rock or whatever. That's another issue that the nuclear industry and the nuclear community needs to address, but the testimony is not the place to do so, because that will always make us look bad. That would be the time to say maybe, this particular bill is irrelevant to the things that they've said, but at that point, you could just leave that out and provide stronger testimony by speaking on the things that you were going to talk about anyway. You might want to address it when someone is talking about we don't know what's going to happen with the waste from this reactor if we keep it open, and or we build a new reactor, and what's going to happen with that waste or whatnot. Then that may be a time for you to mention a specific example would be I addressed some stuff that an anti-nuclear person said in a Diablo Canyon meeting. They were talking about will we be able to construct more space to add nuclear waste to the existing site at Diablo? And I provided information about how quickly they built the ISFC at Zion nuclear power plant, and a little bit of timeline math that says that they would have plenty of time to build the storage capacity, and that shouldn't be an issue for the committee's concern. So in my opinion, logic is kind of the way to go, and you might want this to be one sentence, or you can take your entire time to address it, but you have to make sure that no matter which direction you take to address misinformation, that you still stay within your time slot. You can't try to do both. So you have to find somewhere to cut or not address it at all. And you can definitely offer to be a resource, right? If you're going to say, I'm going to trash my original testimony, I'm going to write another one live before my time slot comes up, and sometimes you don't know when your time slot's going to come up. Sometimes they just say, all right, here's the next person, and then they call your name, and you're like, oh God, it's me. So if you have time, you might want to try to craft it, and in that case, at the end, you might want to say, I would be happy to provide my information, to provide more information about like this subject later on, and include that in your written testimony too. So this one can be kind of tricky, but the number one takeaway is don't be aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go and give testimony for any reason beyond supporting the nuclear community, hearing the things that people say is worth your time. Just like, it's very entertaining at times. So I'm sure you didn't think that you'd actually have to participate in any of this stuff, but we wanted to do a few testimony practice activities. We do actually have paper for everyone if they wanted to look at it themselves. So the first one is that the NRC is holding a hearing about the relicensing of the nuclear power plant in your area. The hearing is open for public verbal testimony. So some of the things you can start thinking about is like, what are some of the things you would want to make sure are in your testimony, and how would you frame it?
Like actually talk to each other and try to craft out like what you would roughly say.
Or include, or not say. Include. Okay, so what are some things we would want to make sure that we include? Anybody?
We're looking for hands, I think.
Yeah.
Reliability of the plant.
Reliability, it's great. What else? Yeah.
History of safe operation.
History of safe operation, yeah.
Keeping already paid off infrastructure.
Yeah,
That's
true. Yes.
Zero CO2.
Zero CO2.
Provides a tax base.
Provides a tax base.
Personal connection to the town.
Personal connection to the town.
The percentage of power that it provides for the county.
Percentage of the power that it provides to the county.
Not only can you do percentage of total power, you can do percentage of clean power, because that number is usually huge.
Lots of good paying jobs.
Yes.
No good alternative.
True.
That historically every nuclear power plant that's been shut down in the United States has been fully replaced by natural gas.
Every single time. No, it's not.
Replaced by coal.
And yeah, some have been replaced by coal. Yep.
Shutdown costs.
Shutdown costs. So these are all things that you should include in your testimony.
But maybe focus on just like one or two of them and provide a really strong argument in one direction.
And a personal anecdote.
You don't want disjointed facts.
Right. All right. Number 2. Representatives from your state legislature are discussing a bill in the Energy and Utilities Committee that would include nuclear energy in the state's climate plan. They have opened up this hearing for public testimony. What should you include? What are some things you should research beforehand? You already know the facts, you know. What else do you need to research?
The unreliability of renewables.
True. What else? Yeah.
Renewables only work a part of the time, and they have to be augmented by coal and oil, and only in certain locations at certain times of the day.
Right. Variability. Yes.
Right, carbon-free base load.
Right.
Go here.
Research the text of the bill and the positions of the various committee members.
Yes, that's the right answer. It's the Energy and Utilities Committee. Who is that? Who are these people? What are their parties? What have they supported before?
Sometimes this committee is full of Republicans. Not often, but like sometimes that happens, and you want to make sure, what am I talking about?
No, it means they're pro. It means they're pro. A lot of the time it does. And a lot of, sometimes you want to look into, who funds a lot of these people? Who gives them a lot of campaign money? Mm-hmm. Is it natural gas?
You do want to know more about the background of the individual people who are going to be at the hearing, what they already believe, and how you can appeal to them. But you also want to generally target the people who are the fence sitters, right? There's the people who you might Google their name and nuclear and find out, oh, they're already very supportive. You might Google their name and nuclear and find out it doesn't matter what you say. They're not going to care either way, right? So you want to target the people where when you Google their name and nuclear, nothing comes up.
Yeah, and Joe Manchin's a great example. He is from a heavily coal-dominated state. Something you should say in your testimony is that 80%, a new study just came out of the DOE, that 80% of coal plants in the United States can be transitioned into a nuclear plant. So if they're pursuing a clean future, that's a great option for them. right, the third one. Do you want to read it?
All right, so you're waiting your turn to give verbal testimony. And another witness goes, nuclear plants are so unsafe. The meltdowns ruin communities and cause generations of people to develop disease and cancer. Do you respond to this person? And how could you potentially respond to it while keeping your testimony still effective and maybe not focusing in on this? And what should you avoid doing?
If I was going to respond to that testimony, I would start off with the history of nuclear meltdowns and what they actually were and the number of people who were actually affected by them. And one example I would use was the incident in Brazil and how it was initially thought to be thousands of people, but at the end of the day, 4 people died. And so it's grossly blown out of proportion as far as the impact of these incidents, not that it's as unsafe as they're trying to make it.
Yes.
Sorry, could you make sure people get a mic?
I've dealt with this question in very hostile Oberlin College and a couple other very anti-nuke situations and everything. And the response that I have found is very successful is to say, we're in the United States. How many lawsuits have there been against the nuclear power industry or this plant that you're alleging all these accidents are happening? And it's 0. So that means there's really not a problem. And so that refutes the allegation just because of our American system, the way we have jurisprudence and everything. So,
you know, there's a good point in there, but sort of the envelope around that point and the tone of it. You guys want to talk a little bit about that? It was in your presentation earlier.
You don't want to be combative, pretty much. That you want to be more empathetic, provide information as a resource. If you just blatantly say, like, what they're saying is not true and here's why, blah, 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 there's a way to say things that makes you sound like you really care about like health and safety and you're not brushing things under the table.
And you're not being condescending to other people testifying, which even if you're 100% right, it just doesn't work as well. You know?
Yeah, just acknowledge, like, yeah, that is actually, you know, a commonly thought belief or a commonly held belief about nuclear power plants, when in actuality, you know, we have research and data that shows. So acknowledge that, you know, where their fears are coming from, and a lot of the time it's been told to them.
Could you share with us what your most successful testimony has been?
I think the easiest one for like answer would be the Byron Dresden testimony that I gave, because it was coordinated with the senator who introduced the bill in the first place. Instead of like, in their hearing, they didn't really make it as accessible to the public, which can be problematic, but at the same time it ensured that the committee members who were present only had to pay attention to like 6 people talk. I think it was like 3 people from our side and like a couple people from the other side. And so they were attentive the whole time. And it was just given like a higher priority. So sometimes getting connections with your senator or representative and having like a very positive relationship where it doesn't feel like you're pestering them all the time and they like you, that can be really helpful for when they introduce a pro-nuclear piece of legislation and they need experts to testify on behalf of it.
I don't have one that's that cool, but I was able to give testimony on behalf of Diablo Canyon, and I think I was one of the only testimonies that actually referenced the employees that worked there and how it was the unnecessary loss of thousands of jobs. And then we just kind of like forget about them when we talk about nuclear power. It's all those, you know, really great high-paying blue-collar jobs that are often forgotten. So, yeah.
We are out of time. Our names are Alyssa Hayes and Madison Schroder. So if you have more to ask of us or just want to chat in general, we'll be around for the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Fantastic.